Welcome and aloha everyone. I'm glad you could join us. We have a lot of people from around the world, and that just shows how much interest there is in today's topic, what's coming in 2023. Everyone wants to know what is about to happen. And we've seen a lot already at the beginning of this year to indicate that this is truly going to be an astounding year for everyone involved in the UFO topic, because for the first time, this subject matter has shifted from an area or being considered as a topic of ridicule, dismissal, to now being center stage as to whether or not things are happening up there that are real, that pertain to national security. So there's been quite a shift, and this is by no means the only thing that we are going to be witnessing. I think this is the beginning of something truly profound. So I'm very happy today to walk you through all of this and go through what I believe are the critical things we need to know to make sense of it all. What is going down this year, and what can we expect as the year progresses and as we enter into 2024 and beyond. But after I present all the data that I have, I am sure you will be optimistic along with me about what is about to go down. So we have quite a lot of people that have been with me before on the Zoom platform. So hopefully this Crowdcast platform is something that you find a little bit easier. That's why we chose to go to this platform for reasons that really pertain to what's about to come down. Because I think what we are going to see is, as the UFO topic becomes mainstream, as it becomes a topic that is being debated more and more in think tanks, in universities, in the mainstream media, those of us that have been active in this field and dismissed before as harmless conspiracy theorists, and now we are going to be moved into a different category of putting out material that can be very controversial or considered to be harmful conspiracy theory. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the webinar itself. So let's begin with what I think is the core issue that we are going to be faced in this presentation. And that is, this is a disclosure war, that there is two competing groups working behind the scenes to see whose narrative is going to be the dominant narrative. That's going to be the one that people are going to accept as the new reality that we are moving into. And so there are these two different groups. One is the deep state, and I've talked about the deep state in the past, and many of you are familiar with the deep state, but that's an umbrella term for those unelected officials that pull the strings of elected officials. And because the deep state is part of a hierarchy, it means that these unelected officials, sometimes they're called the senior executive service, senior bureaucrats. Behind them are more powerful forces, corporations, secret societies that make up the deep state that influences elected politicians, whether at the national level or at the state or provincial level, depending on what country you're in. If you live in a major country, you can be sure that the deep state has a presence. And so the deep state, on the one hand, has its own preferred disclosure narrative. And on the other hand, you have the Earth Alliance. And the Earth Alliance, who makes up the Earth Alliance? Well, it's a very heterogeneous group comprising white hats, those that are positively inclined, secret societies that are kind of like more aligned with, say, service to other mindset, and military, positive military forces, especially those that have been working with galactic organizations, especially recently. So the extraterrestrial factor is very important in this Earth Alliance and deep state disclosure war. Both sides have their own competing extraterrestrial factions trying to influence the future on planet Earth. So that kind of gives you the overall stage for what is going to be going down in 2023. So first of all, let's look at what it is about the UFO issue suddenly becoming mainstream. How did that happen? Where today you have the major media talking about UFOs as a national security threat, where if you go back only 4 or 5 years, it was virtually ignored. But now it's center stage. So what's happened? So first we got to begin with this article that came out in December 2017. It was in the New York Times, and it was focusing on the Pentagon's mysterious UFO program. And that was focused on this information that had been leaked concerning videos of UFOs that were taped by pilots that were part of a flight wing on the USS Nimitz that were taking part in these exercises off the Pacific Ocean in 2004. And so that led to a sequence of events that resulted in this article being written about the videos of the UFO sightings that these pilots witnessed, the famous Tic Tac incident. And I'm sure all of you are very familiar with that. Now, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, that was set up 3 years after these Tic Tac sightings by the Navy pilots. And this was allegedly set up in the Pentagon. Well, it was actually set up in the Pentagon. And one of the key figures in the setting up of this ATIP program was an intelligence official by the name of Luis Elizondo, who's probably well known, or you've heard that name before. So he was part of that, and he came out in around that time, 2017, 2018, he left the Pentagon and began to go public about how unhappy he was that this program that had been set up within the Pentagon to study these mysterious Tic Tac incidents that occurred in 2004, 2005, 2017, that there were a number of these incidents. And so he was disappointed that this was something that the Pentagon didn't take seriously, and that the program, that the ATIP program, lost its funding and was eventually abandoned. So he left the Pentagon and went public to talk about it. So because of his direct involvement in the ATIP program, because that this was a program that was funded by Congress to the tune of $22 million, Senator Harry Reid arranged for that funding back in 2008, people in Congress were very interested in this program. So in 2019, 2020, there were a number of people associated with Luis Elizondo and others that went in and gave these informal briefings to Congress about these Tic Tac incidents and emphasizing that these were a national security threat. So that's where you get this emphasis on the threat. That this program, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was all premised on the idea that these unknown objects that were harassing naval ships, harassing pilots in their F-18s, that these were somehow a national security threat. And Congress wanted to find out how extensive this threat was. So that began 2019. And then in June of 2020, there was a committee in the US Senate called the US Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, and that approved a bill requesting the intelligence community write a report on the national security threat posed by the unidentified aerial phenomenon or phenomena, UAPs. That's the kind of modern terminology for UFOs that's been around for 60 years now. So now public officials want to refer to UAPs. So in June 2020, the Senate approved a bill that was going to require the intelligence community to come up with a report within 180 days. So this is what happened as a result of this bill that was passed in the 2021 Intelligence Appropriations Act. And so this is the report that was actually issued in June 25, 2021. So this is an official report by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who oversees the 18 or so intelligence communities within the United States. So this is what was said within the report. Quote, this preliminary report is provided by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, in response to the provision in the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021 that the Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, is to submit an intelligence assessment of the threat posed by unidentified aerial phenomena. So again, the emphasis is on the threat posed by these objects that had been observed in the sky by Navy pilots and tracked on radar and so forth. So then Congress, the US Congress, after this report was issued in June of 2021, the US Congress went on to hold its first meeting in over 50 years. So Congress holds its first meeting in over 50 years on the mystery of the UFOs. And that was held in that date there. I believe that is May of 2022. So May of 2022, Congress holds the first report. And this is what the US Department of Defense announced as a result of the Congress demanding action and requiring the Department of Defense and intelligence community to establish an organization to investigate UAPs. So the Department of Defense created or reconstituted a office that they had already set up that would report to them, but now Congress had passed a bill requiring the establishment of a formal office that would report to Congress on an annual basis. So this is where you have this press release by the Department of Defense in July of 2022, so just a couple of months after Congress held its report. And the report, this press release says, on July 15, 2022, Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks, in coordination with the Director of National Intelligence, amended the original direction to the Undersecretary of Defense for the Intelligence and Security by renaming and expanding the scope of the Airborne Object Identification and Management Group. That was the initial UAP or UFO group that had been set up by the Pentagon with this impossible to remember acronym. So it was being reconstituted and renamed to the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, much easier to remember, AARO. Due to the enactment of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2022, which includes a provision to establish an office in coordination with the Director of National Intelligence with responsibilities that were broader than those originally assigned to the AIMSOG, which was the prior UFO study group that the Pentagon had set up under the Pentagon's jurisdiction. The difference is now the AARO group is actually required to report to Congress on an annual basis and has more authority given to it because it's part of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2022. So the AARO organization, the mission of the AARO will be to synchronize efforts across the Department of Defense and with other US federal department agencies to detect, identify, and attribute objects of interest in or near military installations, operating areas, training areas, special use airspace, and other areas of interest, and as necessary, to mitigate any associated threats to safety of operations and national security. This includes anomalous identified space, airborne, submerged, and transmedium objects. So this tells us that, again, the Arrow office that was set up is truly focused on threats pertaining to military installations and operations. So from the perspective of Congress and the Pentagon, it's a very important organization, as long as these UFOs are deemed to be a threat. So the Arrow submitted its first report to the US Congress in January of this year, so only last month. And this kind of set off a lot of media interest in the whole Arrow office, really launched it as being a very serious enterprise. So this is what the report said. The executive summary of the report begins as like this. Unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP, reporting is increasing, enabling a greater awareness of the airspace and increased opportunity to resolve UAP events. In addition to the 144 UAP events covered during the 17 years of UAP reporting included in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence Preliminary Assessment, released on June 2021, they're talking about reports going back to 2004 with the Tic Tac sightings of the Admiral that occurred on the Admiral Nimitz, and other UFO sightings subsequent to that were investigated by the ATIP organization that Luis Elizondo headed, and now we have this new organization, Arrow, that is taking over this investigation. The summary continues. There have been 247 new reports and another 119 that were either since discovered or reported after the preliminary assessment's time period. This totals 510 UAP reports as of August 30, 2022. The Arrow and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence assessed that the observed increase in the UAP reporting rate is partially due to a better understanding of the possible threats that UAP may represent. So again, the emphasis is on the threat assessment of UAPs. So this is the gentleman, a scientist who was tapped on the shoulder to head the Arrow office. And once again, he is someone that is focused on UFOs, UAPs being a threat. He's a former director or deputy director in missile development for one of the major aerospace corporations. That's Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. So he's the person now heading the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And given his background, he is someone that is looking at this phenomenon from the lens of, it being a possible threat. How can we deal with that? So the Pentagon says at the beginning of this month, now we get the whole kind of China balloon and what happened after that. So the first report was on February 2nd, when the Pentagon announced that it detected a Chinese spy balloon hovering over Montana. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with this. It basically followed the jet stream from Alaska over Western Canada, as you can see in the diagram. Oops, here we go. You can see in the diagram here, it starts off in Alaska, flies over Canada, then over sensitive areas such as Montana, which is where the US has a lot of silos for its strategic, for its ballistic missiles. And then it flowed out, then it went across the United States and came out South Carolina when it was shot down by an F-22 Raptor. So this was something that many of you are very familiar with, and it showed not so much the issue of UAPs, because it was very quickly established that this was a balloon very likely belonging to China. But after that, you have the UAPs being presented much more as a threat. So when you have another unknown object flying over Alaska, this time they could not identify it as a Chinese balloon, or certainly it appeared to be very different to the China balloon. It was a different type of object. And so once again, it was shot down. But this time, because it wasn't clearly a Chinese spy balloon or weather balloon, this led to a lot of people talking up the threat posed by UFOs or unknown aerial objects. So here you have Admiral John Kirby, who is the National Security Council spokesperson in the Biden administration, and he came out and he gave a briefing on this unknown threat posed by these UFOs that were now starting to appear. So so after the China balloon, then you have the first UFO that they supposedly couldn't identify on February 10th, and it was shot down again by an F-22. So let's hear the press briefing by Admiral Kirby.
I can confirm that the Department of Defense was tracking a high-altitude object over Alaska airspace in the last 24 hours. The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. Out of an abundance of caution and at the recommendation of the Pentagon, President Biden ordered the military to down the object, and they did, and it came inside our territorial waters. Those waters right now are frozen, but inside territorial airspace and over territorial waters. We're calling this an object because that's the best description we have right now. We do not know who owns it. We do expect to be able to recover the debris since it fell not only within our territorial space, but on what we believe is frozen water. So a recovery effort will be made, and we're hopeful that it'll be successful, and then we can learn a little bit more about it.
All right, so there you have Admiral John Kirby talking about this object that they couldn't identify and why it was shot down. So things started to get really interesting when a second UFO was shot down, this time over Canada, and this is the one where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asked the Pentagon, or NORAD, which is responsible for aerospace defense for North America, to shoot down this object over the Canadian skies. So this really kind of brought things to a lot of kind of attention, because now you have a second unknown object, the second in 2 days, being shot down, this time over Canada. So the mainstream media kind of like, we're all over this. You have different kind of perspectives on what was going on. People questioning, what are they? I mean, that was really the kind of central question that was raised by a lot of the mainstream media, that, well, if the Pentagon is shooting these down, if NORAD is shooting these down, that they must be some kind of threat. But what are they? And that couldn't be answered. Other sources were saying that you know, this was a kind of UFO war almost, US versus UFOs. So, so what's known about the car-sized object? So again, not much was known other than the fact that these were unidentified objects and they were deemed to be flying over sensitive airspace, and so they were shot down by these F-22 Raptors. And then you have a third UFO shot down. So this was again happening the day after the previous incident. So in this story by the New York Times, what's going on up there? Theories but no answers in shoot downs of mystery craft. So the New York Times is a really good gauge of what the deep state is planning. And the way I understand it, and it is that the New York Times is pretty much controlled or influenced by the US State Department faction of the deep state, whereas the Washington Post is controlled by the CIA faction of the deep state, you know, which is why this Jeff Bezos or the CIA have this kind of relationship. Bezos, of course, being the owner of the Washington Post. So you get an idea of what the agenda of the deep state is by the headlines the New York Times give to these prominent stories. And so you're looking at this headline, what's going on up there, theories but no answers. It's like the deep state wants us to look up at the sky, at these UFOs, and ask questions. What are they? Where are they from? Are they a threat? And of course, them being shot down is kind of like sensational. It's like, well, this is serious because these things are being shot down, so there must be some kind of threat. Now, in this story, you get a very revealing kind of phrase that is used. So the New York Times refers to invasion of unidentified flying objects. So clearly, they want people to be concerned about some kind of invasion. So if the truth is out there, it certainly is not apparent yet. Pentagon intelligence officials are trying to make sense of 3 unidentified flying objects over Alaska, Canada, and Michigan that US fighter jets shot down with missiles on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The latest turn in the aerial show taking place in the skies above North America comes after a helter-skelter weekend involving what at times seemed like an invasion of unidentified flying objects. So this is very revealing that the deep state wants us to think that these UFOs that are being sighted are a threat and that they are a possible invasion by someone. They're not sure who. They want us to kind of speculate about it, but that's the agenda of the deep state. So this map just shows you the different locations where the objects were shot down, starting with the Chinese spy balloon, and then the other 4 objects, or the other 3 objects, sorry. So 4 altogether that were shot down. There was a 5th object that apparently got away, as I recall. So now, as far as I know, this was something Senator Marco Rubio said, and I couldn't confirm it, but he said, and I thought it was very interesting. He said that these shoot-downs were the first shoot-downs by NORAD, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command, since its 1958 creation, which is very interesting. So the Biden administration is taking unprecedented action in shooting down these objects. And obviously they want the mass media to focus on it. And of course, the general public, us, to focus on what the mass media is writing about. Okay, so now, just to kind of make it even more complex, is that the Pentagon, or at the White House in particular, sorry, the White House, because these are taken to be an unprecedented national security threat, that the White House sets up another organization to investigate UFOs. So this is different to the AARO group, or the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is set up under the auspices of the Pentagon, according to provisions in that Congress passed in the 2022 Congressional Defense Authorization Act. That this office is now an interagency task force headed by Jake Sullivan, which is the National Security Advisor. So this new office that was set up under the Biden administration is presumably going to be the kind of tip of the spear of the Biden administration's efforts to kind of deal with this threat posed by UFOs. So we'll hear a lot more about this. But Jake Sullivan, he's a neocon, a very aggressive person who believes in threats by all kinds of imaginary enemies facing the United States. And we see how the neocons organize wars in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and now they're trying to do a war in Iran. And of course, the neocons are very much behind the war in Ukraine. So Jake Sullivan is part of that group. So he's the person in charge of this interagency task force, which involves the CIA, the Pentagon, the White House, National Security Council, and other interested parties that are all going to get together and say, okay, well, what's going on here? And of course, they're going to just spout whatever agenda these people want, which is to kind of get people frightened and to be concerned about this kind of, a new threat that they say is something that people need to be very concerned about. So this raises the very interesting question, is this the famed deep state PSYOP called, or a false flag alien invasion, or some kind of false flag psychological operation? Now, I did do a webinar on this, and it's on Vimeo back in August of 2021. So you can find it there if you want to kind of go into the history. But I'll just give you a very short, abbreviated rundown of what this alien false flag PSYOP is, just to better understand exactly what can be going down right now. So the first mention of a false flag alien psychological operation was in the report from Iron Mountain, and that was published in 1967, or its initial publication was leaked into the public arena. Only a limited number of copies were made, supposedly for restricted use. But copies were leaked out into the public, and the authors then denied it as being genuine. But in this report, pardon me, in this report, it says, quote, development of an acceptable threat from outer space, less aggressive approaches to the creation of fictitious global enemies invite further investigation. So that's a kind of convoluted way of saying that a possible threat from outer space that's just created, that's fictitious, a false flag event, is very desirable for maintaining levels of defense spending that the military-industrial complex wants. So this document is essentially a kind of a brainstorming document for ingenious ways that the military-industrial complex could hoodwink the American public into continued funding of the military-industrial complex. And a contrived threat from outer space is one of those. So that was from 1967. Now, Project Bluebeam, the first reference to the actual term I could find was in this 1994 book by a French-Canadian researcher, Serge Monast, who wrote this book. And he got a lot of inside tips on this Project Bluebeam. And I think he was kind of over the target because he faced a lot of harassment. And in fact, it got so bad that in 1996, he was arrested, imprisoned, and dies from a heart attack one day later, and he was only 41. And what even made it even more clear that this was truly a deep state assassination was that a fellow investigator died also from a mysterious heart attack, and he was similarly aged. And he only died a week or two after Serge Monast died. So very sad. But that was, and this was also an era when people that were too close or had insider information and were revealing that they would be bumped off. Some of you probably remember the famous Phil Schneider. He was assassinated in January of 1996. So 1996 was a bad year if you were wanting to reveal the truth. So key elements of Project Bluebeam, according to Serge Monast, he said that Project Bluebeam is a multi-step series of events that incorporates a hoax alien invasion as part of a more complex alien salvation event. Now, this is the part that people like Dr. Stephen Greer ignore, that they always say, well, that the false flag alien event is about this alien invasion, that's a contrived alien invasion. And they overlook the fact that this was actually part of a multi-step series of events, one of which involved an alien salvation event, which is even more sinister if you think about it, that rather than going forward with an alien invasion, you go forward with an alien salvation event. That somehow things happen, and then all of a sudden aliens arrive to save us. And I think that is a very, very dangerous scenario. So factors required for the success of Project Bluebeam. Serge Monast said back in 1996 when his book, 1994 when his book was published, Project Bluebeam would need support of the mainstream media, support of major religious institutions. We kind of see elements of this today. The mainstream media is definitely behind the deep state. Major religious institutions like the Catholic Church is very supportive of the deep state agenda. Suitable global political and economic conditions. Okay, well, you kind of have that now with the way in which the World Economic Forum has exerted influence over the global political system. A mass public opinion that doesn't exist right now, and support of leading UFO researchers. So that also doesn't exist right now. So back in 1996, Serge Monast said that these conditions were needed, but they weren't yet ready. Today, we're much closer to these conditions being met, apart from conditions D and E, which is why I think we're being kind of like subjugated to this blitzkrieg of UFO threat narratives that are now suddenly emerging from the political class or the mainstream media in the United States, and support of leading UFO researchers. Many researchers are being co-opted to support some kind of blue beam agenda. Now, what I find very interesting in terms of what we are witnessing right now is that the extraterrestrial component doesn't seem to be a factor in the psychological operation that I think the deep state is launching at this moment. So it's like these UFOs that are being shot down, they are being presented in terms of an unknown threat, but the deep state is very, very careful not to say that these are an extraterrestrial object. That they are saying, well, they're just unknown, we don't know what they are, we can exclude extraterrestrial, because they want us not to focus on the extraterrestrial, they want us to focus on the unknown, because I think the deep state is quite happy to get us to kind of like just turn the mental wheels, to go, what are they, where are they from, but rule out the extraterrestrial factor, because they know that the public is aware of this Project Bluebeam information, and they know that as soon as the deep state starts talking about an extraterrestrial threat, that everyone's going to jump on the Bluebeam bandwagon. But they think that by not mentioning extraterrestrials, that they can still come out with something like Bluebeam, but without the extraterrestrial factor. And you see this in this press conference by the press secretary for the Biden administration. So I'll play that clip.
Turn it over to the Admiral. I just wanted to make sure we address this from the White House. I know there's been questions and concerns about this, but there is no indication of aliens or extraterrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Again, there is no indication of aliens or terrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Wanted to make sure that the American people knew that, all of you knew that, and it was important for us to say that from here because we've been hearing a lot about it. I'm not.
Will you tell us?
I'm just, I loved E.T. the movie, but I'm just going to leave it there. With that, with all seriousness, I know there's a lot of questions about the flying objects. Admiral John Kirby is here with us today, and he's going to have a couple things to say at the top about it, and then take your questions. Okay?
Okay, so there you see what the White House is putting out, the talking points at the White House, that these UFOs are out there, they're unknown, they're a national security threat, but the talk about them being extraterrestrials, oh no, that's just nonsense. Then we don't know what they are. They're not extraterrestrial. There's something else. So that's, I think, the spin they're putting on this, that they want us to focus on the UFOs as a threat, but exclude the extraterrestrial factor, because they've done their analysis and they know as soon as they start talking about UFOs as a threat that are extraterrestrial in origin, that the kind of UFO research community is going to be opposed to this. But as long as they keep the ET factor out and just focus on the UFO aspect, that they can get kind of broad mainstream interest in this going. So I think what we are seeing now, and a lot of people have said the same thing, that UFOs are being used as a weapon of mass distraction. So the media assets, the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN, and all of those legacy media organizations are being used to promote a fear-based UFO disclosure narrative. Because the deep state knows that it's unlikely to succeed in a false flag UFO alien invasion scenario. So the War of the Worlds, as H.G. Wells kind of envisaged originally, as in the original movie and then the remake with Tom Cruise, that what they're rolling out at this stage isn't going to involve an extraterrestrial armor. It's just going to be something else. So UFOs are being used as a weapon of mass distraction. So they want the appearance of a shooting war with UFOs to just kind of get us to look over here and not over there, right? So that's the point. So I think a picture tells 1,000 words, and I think this is a meme. If you've seen it before, I think it really kind of is something worth sending off to your friends, because it really shows what has been happening for the last 3 years. You first have the virus PSYOP, then you have the vaccine PSYOP, the Ukraine PSYOP, and I'll talk a little bit more about that soon, and then you have the UFO PSYOP, and we are at the beginning of the UFO PSYOP. A lot more is going to happen. I'll talk about that. But firstly, this takes me to what happened when I put together with Angelica the video trailer for this webinar, where we talked about, where we kind of like summarized these elements in there. It was immediately taken down by YouTube and then Vimeo, which was surprising to us. But it was taken down immediately. I got a strike and couldn't post for a week. And they said that our trailer was promoting or inciting violence. They describe it as harmful conspiracy theory. And so I wrote an article where I talk about that. I went into detail into that. But I think what this shows, I think this is very clearly a sign that people like myself, who for years have been ridiculed, ignored, and now we're going to be put into the category of harmful conspiracy theorists. So that previously we were allowed to just kind of like put out our videos and put out information about UFOs, extraterrestrials, without too much censorship at all, if any, other than the occasional warning sign. You go to a YouTube video and you put out a video about the Anunnaki or the reptilians, and there's a little note there by YouTube saying, well, Anunnaki and Sumerian mythical beings and so forth. That was about as far as it went. But now I think we are going to be seeing the censorship really take off, because now they are wanting to move forward with their PSYOP to get people to focus on this weapon on this mass distraction weapon that they're utilizing, and they want to stop people from exposing this. And that's what we did in the trailer. So they stopped that. So as far as these UFOs that were shot down, I mean, is this about as much as we're going to see? These things come up, they're unknown, and they're going to be shot down, or is something else going to happen that is going to raise this up several levels? So this is where we get to some people who say that they have inside information that the UFO PSYOP is going to very quickly morph into a phenomenon that involves mass casualties and societal disruptions. So Michael Jaco, he's a former US Navy SEAL and a former CIA operative, never sure about that. But he says in an interview, he said that the 5G technology in vaccines will be activated, causing mass deaths, and this will be blamed on the UFOs. So this is not my theory. I'm just telling you what he's saying, and something worth considering. If all of a sudden a lot of people start dying from these UFOs suddenly appearing in the sky, is it because the UFOs are doing something, or is some kind of 5G technology being activated that causes people to just die in some way, and that's going to be attributed to UFOs? So that's possibly when this whole UFO PSYOP is going to take a much more sinister turn, from just being, well, what are they? We don't know what they are, to, oh my God, people are dying. What are we going to do? To that's going to be something that Jaco thinks is going to happen because of the 5G technology that's part of these vaccines. So that's his hypothesis. Another hypothesis is John D'Souza, former FBI agent, and he says his analysis and his inside sources are telling him that the UFOs will deploy an EMP weapon that cause massive societal disruption. So if anyone has ever seen the movie The Fifth Wave, that describes what happens to the United States during an EMP attack. Basically, all our electricals are fried. The only electrical equipment are those that are protected in kind of like a Faraday cages or in these hardened protective facilities that the military has. That the rest of us will have to survive with all electronics being fried, which means no water, no gasoline, no power for who knows how many weeks, how many months. So that would certainly be a massive societal disruption, leading to a lot of people dying, I'm sure. So that's John D'Souza's take on where this UFO psyop is going to go. Because one of the things in the reports of these UFOs is that they refer to these UFOs, the ones that were shot down, having payloads. So they refer to them having payloads. So obviously the ones that have been shot down so far, nothing has happened. But what happens if another one is shot down and all of a sudden a lot of people start dying? Is it because of could an EMP weapon be associated with that? Or could it be what Jaco is saying? Something to keep in mind. So why is it all happening now? Why is the UFO threat psyop being played now? So there's a number of reasons that I think are pertinent to why this particular card is finally being played. I mean, people have been talking about this for years. Carol Rosen, Stephen Greer began talking about this in the late 1990s. In 2001 at the Disclosure Project press conference, Carol Rosen talked about this different stages that would lead to a false flag alien event and how the military-industrial complex would go through each step. So now we are at that final step. So why is the deep state playing this now? Well, I think there are a number of reasons. One is the Ukraine war is going badly. I mean, no matter what you read in the newspapers, in the legacy media, it's really going badly. If you go to independent sources that actually have a lot of grounded, impartial, empirical data, Russia is about to massively crush the Ukrainian military. And that will expose almost a year of media gaslighting by the deep state that Ukraine had a real chance of defeating Russia militarily and expose the failed diplomacy that happened. Because at different points in this conflict, there were attempts, genuine attempts, to find a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine crisis over the Donbass. Russia wanted to negotiate. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, wanted to negotiate. But the deep state told Zelensky, no, we'll fund you, we'll give you everything you need. You got to impose a military solution to this, no diplomacy. And so that was the line, and that was what Zelensky did, the president of Ukraine. And we are now witnessing the final stages of the rout of the Ukrainian military. And the deep state knows this and knows that people are then going to ask, well, why did we send over $100 billion? Why did we ignore diplomatic efforts for a conflict that has turned out to be a dead end for us? Well, why do that? So the Biden administration wants to distract us. So the UFO card is played. Another factor, why now, is Seymour Hersh. He's suddenly blown the whistle. He's gotten genuine insiders. There's more than one, but Seymour Hersh has gotten it clearly that this was a rogue CIA operation to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline outside of the normal chain of command for special operations, which typically is routed through Special Operations Command, which is based out of MacDill Air Force Base in Florida, where these kinds of operations are sanctioned. This was a CIA operation using some Navy SEALs and frogmen to go out and destroy this pipeline under the cover of a US military exercise. So Seymour Hersh has exposed this, and the deep state is in a panic, because Seymour Hersh is a very significant figure that major media around the world and statespeople are going to pay attention to, and that already investigations have begun. So the deep state knows this, and so they're playing their UFO card. Other reasons why are the US dollar. There's a lot of rumors about the US dollar about to collapse. That's possible. Vaccine deaths about to explode. A lot of rumors about that. Elon Musk, the Twitter files, a lot of stories that are emerging from what he's been releasing through these Twitter drops. Child sex trafficking, more and more of that is being exposed around the world, which the deep state wants to distract from, because this has been a major source of revenue for them. And so there's really very rapid awareness growing around the planet of the legacy media being compromised, that this is part of what is known as Operation Mockingbird, which is a CIA-controlled operation to implant its assets into major media organizations, not only in the United States, but around the world, and to control the news narratives. And so this has been going on for a long time. I mean, this has been exposed. Typically what happens is that the editor at a major newspaper like the New York Times, Washington Post, Daily Telegraph, or whatever, around the world at 4 a.m., they get a set of talking points mailed to them by their CIA handlers. And the editors will then, when the journalists come in that morning, say, these are the big issues we're going to be focusing on today. And they're going to go through those talking points. So that's the way it operates. And anyone that goes outside of those talking points, they get ostracized by the editors. So this is the way the major media operates. So this now takes me to what I feel is another big factor, if not the most important factor, into what is going on behind this rollout of the false flag UFO operation, the SIOP. So I think a lot of it has to do with something that Leonard Danaan described, and let me just kind of like say, for those that aren't familiar with Elena, I don't know how many of you don't know who she is, but Elena Danaan is a former professional French archaeologist, and she had memories of childhood ET experiences where she was abducted by grey aliens, and then she was rescued by these blonde, Nordic-looking extraterrestrials, one of whom was Thorhan Eredjian. And she had those memories, but they were kind of like suppressed. And then in 2018, those memories resurfaced. And her contacts with Thorhan Eredjian and the Galactic Federation of Worlds resumed. So that happened in 2018. So she has an implant in her that she describes as being put in there by the grey aliens when she was abducted as a child, and that grey implant couldn't be removed. But what the Galactic Federation did was to repurpose it so that it could then be used as a means of her communicating with the Galactic Federation through Thorhan. So Thorhan in particular can communicate with Elena through this implant so that he can download information to her, telepathically communicate at any time. And what's directly relevant to what I want to talk about now is that she can see through Thorhan's eyes. It's almost like he can flip a switch and say, okay, this is what I'm seeing right now, that somehow the technology that he has that interfaces with this implant can allow Elena to see in her mind's eye what Thorhan is seeing at any one point. So this takes me to this story. she describes how Thorhan was taken on January 7th to this Blue Ridge Mountain facility. So she just remembers Thorhan arriving at this facility, and he told her about it, and she could see through his eyes as he looked around him, and he could see a panorama. And the way he described that panorama, she drew a sketch of it and she showed it to me. And so then we compared with some of the known underground facilities that deal with continuity of government, because Thorhan went to this meeting that was occurring at this mountain complex that was focused on continuity of government. And so we were able to track down, we were able to kind of whittle it down to it either being Mount Weather in Virginia, which is a continuity of government underground facility, or the Raven Rock Mountain Complex, which is in Pennsylvania. And so when she looked at the panorama of both groups, Elena, I remember her telling me immediately, no, it's this one, Raven Rock. And which makes sense because Raven Rock is actually a military facility, whereas Mount Weather in Virginia comes under the jurisdiction of the Department of Homeland Security, which is controlled pretty much by the Biden administration. So this is a military facility. And so she says that what she saw at the facility through Thorhan's eyes was a number of things, but one of the things she saw inside the complex, it was a massive complex with a lot of equipment, a lot of personnel, and she saw a spaceport there. And she saw flying triangles, and of course the craft that Thorhan had arrived in was also there at this spaceport in this underground facility at Raven Rock. And so in doing due diligence, I was able to find that there actually have been regular UFO sightings at Raven Rock. Here you have the Black Vault's John Greenwald releasing some Freedom of Information Act reports showing that there were UFOs over Raven Rock Mountain Complex in July of 1976. So here's some documentary data showing that there is UFO activity associated with Raven Rock, which directly supports Elena's claim that Thorhan was present at an underground spaceport at Raven Rock. Now, this is where it gets into the really pertinent stuff for our purposes. She says that she saw Thorhan hand over a device to a 4-star general. First, she said she saw 5 stars, but then she, as I pointed out to her, there hasn't been a 5-star general since Omar Bradley. That in fact what she saw were 4 stars and the pip on the lapel of the general, which you might think that was 5 stars, but she said that her attention was not so much on how many stars were there, she just got a glance at that, but she was looking at this device that Thorhan was giving to a 4-star general. So this was a data storage device that he gave to the general. And so the contents of it were so sensitive that they couldn't be transmitted electronically or holographically, but had to be done directly, face to face. So this was a disclosure plan that the Galactic Federation of Worlds, in association with other galactic organizations, had put together and were given to the 4-star general. So this is direct evidence. Well, what we have here is Elena, through Thorhan, giving us information saying that there is direct collaboration between a 4-star general leading or involved at the Raven Rock Mountain Complex with the Galactic Federation in promoting UFO disclosure. I mean, that's huge. I mean, that's amazing. Think about it. That a top military organization in the United States can be collaborating with extraterrestrials in a disclosure plan. So the next step, when Elena told me this, was to identify who was the 4-star general. So there was a list of 44 4-star generals. Now look at that. Isn't that interesting? 44 four-star generals. Isn't that interesting? 444. I mean, in numerology, what is that? What is that number? I think many of you who are active in numerology will think, well, isn't that an angel number? So there are 44 active four-star generals, according to Wikipedia. And as we went through the list, 44 of these, Elena identified General Glenn Van Herk as the person that Thorhan gave the storage device over to. And he's a four-star general with the US Air Force. And he is the present commander of Northern Command and NORAD. So he's been in charge of those since August 2022. So Elena didn't know anything about him. She had never heard of this general before. I mean, she's living in Ireland and she's French descent, so why would she know the list of different four-star generals in charge of combatant commands? That's not the sort of thing a lot of people would know too much about. But when you think about it, his present command makes him the ideal person for implementing a disclosure plan that had been developed by the Galactic Federation of Worlds in cooperation with the Earth Alliance, because he's in charge of Northern Command. So this is Northern Command covers the jurisdiction of the continental United States, Canada, including Canada and Alaska, air defense. Sorry, that's NORAD. NORAD is responsible for the air defense of the United States, Alaska, and Canada. But Northern Command is an organization that has overlapping responsibility to ensure the defense of the United States in case of an attack, in case of any kind of an attack, whether we're talking about a kinetic physical attack, whether we're talking about a cyberspace attack, whether we're talking about kind of like an unknown threat. He would be the person directly responsible for that, General Glenn Van Herk. So he would be the logical choice for leading this. Now, his role in continuity of government is very, very interesting. General Van Herk is in charge of continuity of government emergencies as a head of Northern Command, because if there was an emergency in the United States where Washington, D.C. was wiped out or rendered inoperative, you know, whether it was due to an EMP, whether it's through some devastating explosion or some kind of catastrophic quarantine or whatever it is, if Washington, D.C. was cut off, he would be the person in charge of continuity of government operations to ensure that the government would continue. So he would be the person in charge of security and all of that. And interestingly, there have been a lot of rumors. So I'll have to treat them as rumors. I mean, many people here watching this are very familiar with claims that the 2020 elections involved a significant amount of foreign election interference. I don't want to get into the pros and the cons of that, but if that's true, and I believe it was true, that there was significant foreign election interference to justify some kind of continuity of government emergency, then Glenn Van Herk would have been the general in charge of that. And there were a lot of rumors that Cheyenne Mountain was being used for this continuity of government emergency to deal with this kind of cyber attack on the United States. Again, General Van Herk was the guy in charge of that. So here you have a map that shows you the jurisdiction of Northern Command. So Northern Command covers, of course, all of North America. Sorry, it covers the areas in red circles. Well, you have the United States, you have up here Alaska, down here you have Puerto Rico, nice location. My wife and I are thinking of making a move over to Puerto Rico. Love Tennessee. Tennessee's beautiful, but the winters here are a bit too hard for us. We're soft, you know, we like the tropics. So Puerto Rico, here we come. So Puerto Rico is on our radar, but you can see Northern Command covers this whole area NORTHCOM, continental United States, including, so that's the area. Now, one thing that I wanted to kind of like draw your attention to is that Northern Command also covers this area of the Atlantic Ocean where the Bermuda Triangle is. That'll be very pertinent to what I'm going to be talking about very soon. So the Bermuda Triangle, kind of like, you know, somewhere down there, Northern Command kind of is in charge of that. Okay, so that gives you an idea of Northern Command. So what is Northern Command? Okay, so you have here, this is how the United States military divvies up the world. You have kind of like 6 geographical combatant commands, all of which are headed by 4-star generals. So General Glenn Van Herk, as we know, is in charge of Northern Command. This is the area, the geographic region controlled by Northern Command. But you have a commander for Europe, you have Central Command, you have Africa Command, South America or Latin America, and then you have Indo-Pacific Command. And then you have these functional commands. Special Operations Command is a very interesting one because that's the one that deals with all covert operations, pooling the Navy SEALs, the Delta Force, Green Berets, and all of these elite groups from the different military groups, Marine Special Com, MARSCOM from the Marines. All of these groups come under Special Operations Command. So Special Operations Command is very important because these are very highly trained personnel that perform all kinds of missions, both on-world and off-world. Now, up here, you see Space Command. Now, Space Command's jurisdiction begins, I believe it's 50 miles up in the atmosphere. So up until 50 miles, any of these geographic commands controls the airspace, but above 50 miles, that's when Space Command takes over. And Space Command pulls together all of the space assets of all of the militaries. We're talking about the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, the Army, all of their space assets. They still can operate under Army satellite reconnaissance or Navy satellite operations and so forth, but they all are integrated under US Space Command. This is the way in which the US is able to integrate its military operations involving 5 military services, and if you include the Coast Guard, it's 6, over all of these geographical regions because they have this combatant command structure. So, okay, so that gives you an idea now of the way in which the military operates. But as far as Northern Command is concerned, and as far as Space Command is concerned, these are 2 combatant commands that collaborate very, very closely. And as I'll show you, they are both centered or located at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado. So let me talk about that some more. So now we get to the Jupiter Accords. So the Jupiter Accords, they resulted in the US being chosen to lead Earth's spacefaring nations in an executive committee likely comprising the US, China, Russia, France, Britain, and Japan. So there's an article I wrote on exopolitics.org, and in my last book, Galactic Federations, I talked about this, where you have these Jupiter Accords where you had 14 spacefaring nations, or the space commands or the space agencies of 14 nations being present on Jupiter, above, in the upper atmosphere of Jupiter at this facility controlled by the Ashtar Command, where an agreement was reached, where it was decided that the Earth would operate as a kind of unified space entity in future under the leadership of the US, and in particular US Space Command, and that there would be an executive committee providing oversight for the space operations for all Earth's spacefaring agencies or nations, and that executive committee would be pretty much what we see today in terms of the membership of the United Nations Security Council with the addition of Japan. That was what, based on the information we got, that Elena Danaan got, and I was able to kind of like investigate further and ask questions about that. That was the list of 6 nations that we felt were most likely to be part of the executive committee. But these 6 nations that are heading the executive committee, they are chaired. The chairman that's responsible for kind of coordinating all of this is US Space Command. And as I mentioned, US Space Command and Northern Command collaborate very, very closely. So Space Command, General Van Herk, and the Jupiter Accords. So collaboration between Space Command and Northern Command. The agreements reached in the Jupiter Accords created a framework in terms of how the Earth would expand into our solar system and take over the authority of space in our solar system that had previously been under the control of regressive extraterrestrial races. And I'll talk about what happened to the regressive extraterrestrial races shortly. But with the departure of the regressive extraterrestrial races, it meant that now who's going to fill this void? And the positive extraterrestrials didn't want to do it. They said, it's not our job. We just want to help you get up to speed so that you can now take control of your solar system. So that was the basis of the Jupiter Accords. And so it makes a lot of sense that a disclosure plan was a result of this, or that it would be a corollary of the Jupiter Accords. And because of the close collaboration between Space Command, Northern Command, and whatever agreement was reached at the Jupiter Accords, then we can understand that a disclosure plan to reveal the existence of secret space programs and then extraterrestrial life is what we are going to be witnessing shortly. So here you have General Van Herk and US Space Command at Peterson Space Force Base. So Peterson Space Force Base is located in Colorado Springs, supports North American Aerospace Defense Command, that's NORAD, US Northern Command, US Space Command, and the Space Operations Command. So essentially, this is the place. If you were to coordinate a disclosure plan involving the Earth's military cooperating with other nations to reveal the truth of secret space programs and extraterrestrial life, this is how you would do it, through this, through the US collaboration here at the headquarters of Space Command and Northern Command at Peterson Space Force Base. So this takes me back now to the China balloon incident, because what it did, one of the things it did was that it elevated General Van Herk to national spotlight. No one had heard of him before. Very few people had heard of this general before. I mean, who knows who the commander of NORAD is? I mean, a lot of Americans don't even know who the vice president of the United States is. I mean, Mark Dice interviews people all the time and says, who's the vice president of the United States? Isn't that? So no one would know who General Van Herk is. But I thought it was very, very interesting that with the China, or with the balloon incident, all of a sudden, NORAD and Northern Command were elevated into the mainstream media attention. So is that accidental? I mean, you think about it. Elena tells me about this meeting at Raven Rock Mountain Complex on January 6, January 7 this year. And then less than a month later, or just about a month later, you have a balloon incident where the very general who was given a disclosure plan is now front and center giving interviews and being cited in terms of how's NORAD responding to this China balloon incident. And of course, what happened subsequently with the other 3 UFOs that were sighted, tracked, and then shot down. All of a sudden, General Van Herk, everyone knows him. Very, very curious. I mean, is this is this a coincidence or is this part of the disclosure plan? So what I have now is a little video clip where you're going to get General Van Herk talking about this shooting down of aliens, and he's going to say that the alien factor is relevant. Now, remember earlier on I said that the White House was trying really hard to like, no, these are not extraterrestrials, ha ha ha. Anyone that thinks they're extraterrestrials are dumb and stupid, ha ha ha. Well, General Van Herk is saying, no, the extraterrestrial explanation is on the table. So what we're seeing is different narratives are being pushed here. So let's listen to General Van Herk talk about the alien factor.
New York Times.
Hi, thanks, Pat, and thanks for doing this. This is for General Van Herk. Because you still haven't been able to tell us what these things are that we are shooting out of the sky, that raises the question, have you ruled out aliens or extraterrestrials, and if so, why? Because that is what everyone is asking us right now.
Hey, thanks for the question, Colleen. I'll let the intel community and the counterintelligence community figure that out. I haven't ruled out anything at this point. We continue to assess every threat or potential threat unknown that approaches North America with the attempt to identify it.
Okay, so there you have General Van Herk saying that these shoot-downs involve craft that are unknown origin, but we cannot rule out the extraterrestrial factor. So why is he doing that? Why is he kind of like not ruling that out? I think it's because we are in the middle of this deep state psyop being co-opted by the Earth Alliance to implement a disclosure plan. For decades now, the deep state has prevented the disclosure of secret space programs, extraterrestrial life from going forward. Now the deep state is playing its UFO psyop card, but wants to limit it to, well, we don't know what they are. Anyone talking about extraterrestrials are being ridiculous. That's conspiracy theory, ha ha ha. But General Van Herk is saying, no, this is still on the table. So I think what we're seeing here is that the deep state psyop is being co-opted by the Earth Alliance, by the military, Northern Command spokesperson, to begin the disclosure plan. So this is kind of like 3D chess, if you like, that the plan is being, what the deep state is trying to do is being co-opted. Another way of looking at it is jiu-jitsu, where in jiu-jitsu, one of the key principles is that you redirect an opponent's force to use it against him. So the deep state plays its psyop, saying UFOs are a threat. Everyone needs to be fearful of these, but we don't know what they are. So you use that narrative and you kind of like redirect it and say, well, we can't be certain that this isn't related to extraterrestrials. And so what you do is that you shift that narrative, you redirect it, or the force of the deep state's disclosure narrative, limited disclosure narrative, to something that kind of broadens people's minds to start looking at UFOs. So in a jiu-jitsu move, the Pentagon flips the White House UFO narrative. So the deep state is trying to say, well, we don't know what they are. It's a speculation if anyone talks about them. So now the Pentagon, through Admiral Kirby, and Admiral Kirby, I believe, is a white hat, and he's been put in charge of the the Biden National Security Council, which is supposedly in charge or running the national security of the country, but Kirby has been put there to make sure that what's coming out of the National Security Council doesn't really jeopardize US national security. So he's, I think, part of the White Hats. He's an admiral. And so now he says that, well, the leading explanation for these UFOs are tied to commercial or research use. So this is kind of like really, putting the needle in the deep state's psyop, really trying to deflate that psychological operation, kind of say, well, after all said and done, we think it might be just commercial and research use. Well, I think what's happening there is that the Pentagon, which is the spokesperson here for, or Kirby, is being given information by the military intelligence community to really start to shift the focus to what is really behind this phenomenon, which is the corporations, the major aerospace corporations that are part of the deep state, that have their own secret space program, and that they are the ones that will be leading or unfolding whatever kind of darker manifestation this UFO PSYOP takes. So I think this leading explanation pointing to commercial and research use is kind of like trying to redirect attention to looking at the role of the corporations in all of this. So I think what we are having is two narratives, one coming out of the White House, one coming out of the Pentagon. So the Pentagon UFO narrative is controlled by NORAD, Northern Command, Space Command, and this Earth Alliance that I mentioned that emerged as a result of the Jupiter Accords. So this takes me now to my Army insider who has been sharing information with me about space arcs, extraterrestrial contact, and special operations, JP. And he's got an update that is directly relevant to this disclosure plan that was apparently presented to General Van Herk at Raven Rock Mountain Complex on January 7 of this year. So his latest revelations, I'm going to publish his interview on Monday, so you're going to get the scoop in this webinar as to what is actually in his latest update. So I will play a couple of clips from that shortly, so you'll get to see and hear what he has to say. So for those of you that aren't familiar with JP, I have a webpage on my website, exopolitics.org, where I talk about him and present a lot of the articles, the photographs, the video that he's presented to me and that I've released publicly that show that he's involved in these special operations and is also an extraterrestrial contactee. So there's a webpage where you can find out more about him on exopolitics.org. Just go into the resources tab on my website and you'll see at the very top there the JP page. So for just very briefly, I first was approached by JP in 2008. He was 23 years old at the time, and he was involved in a contact experience with Nordic extraterrestrials. And he said he got downloads of advanced technologies and started to build some free energy devices, and military intelligence operatives started to monitor him and his communications with me and others. He was then taken on multiple covert operations, beginning in 2014, taken to remote locations with caverns possessing ancient technologies. And his interactions were being observed by special operations teams. So he was being taken to these places around the planet and even off planet, and they were monitoring how well he could interact with and activate ancient technology or extraterrestrial technology. Clearly, the deep state, the military intelligence community want to know the applications and the potential of all of these ancient technologies that are being found on Earth and in space. And they find that the consciousness and the genetics of the people interacting with these technologies are a big factor in whether or not these technologies can be activated and operate. Because if you can't activate a technology, then you don't know how it works. You don't know whether it's something you can reverse engineer. But once you activate it, then you can study it. So they need people like JP to interface with these technologies to see whether or not they can be activated and then studied and reverse engineered. So this, for JP, this began in 2014, and he had many experiences, and I am currently working on a book about JP's experiences, and that will come out probably in May of this year. But there's a conference presentation I did at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection in October of 2022, where I did a whole presentation on that. And so you can watch that. So just go to the, do a Google search, Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection, and you'll find that conference, and they have the video presentations from 2022. And my presentation on JP will be there. So I highly recommend you going to that to watch that, to learn about JP. So for JP, what makes his journey very interesting was that in 2019, he joined the US Army. And he joined this for a number of reasons. He felt that he could make a better contribution to disclosure if he was part of the military. And there were also agreements that were reached between the Nordic extraterrestrials he's been working with the US military. So, and those agreements meant that they would collaborate with JP, which is why from 2014 and 2015, JP was involved in a number of things that involved both extraterrestrials and the Special Operations Community. And I mentioned Special Operations Command out of MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. In 2017 and 2018, JP was being encouraged to take photographs of their anti-gravity vehicles. And that's on my website. So, people say, well, anyone can come up with a story. Where's the evidence? Well, there is a lot of evidence on my website for JP. He's got photographs of craft that he says he was taken on. And these craft belong to both extraterrestrials and the Special Operations Command out of MacDill Air Force Base. He interacted with personnel from both. So not only does he remember what happened, he took photographs of the craft. And very, very interesting was that he was being encouraged to take the photographs by the special operators associated with the Air Force Special Operations Community, or the space, they're called air commandos. So he was being encouraged to do this. And so there's photographs supporting what JP said. But they were always saying, look, if you join the military, you could get much more access. So JP decided in 2019 he would join. And so he joined and he trained. Here's a certificate for his regular military occupation specialty and for the United States Army Ordnance Corps. He also did training for special forces, in particular the parachute division. Sorry, the name just escapes me at the moment, but he's done special airborne special training. He's done that. And then he began classified missions to space, arcs, space bases, and underground and underwater cities. So I've been talking about those in previous articles. Now, the interesting thing here is that I mentioned the Bermuda Triangle earlier as one of those areas of responsibility that fall under the jurisdiction of Northern Command. Now, JP has done missions into space that are clearly controlled by Space Command, and he's been taken to the moon, where he went inside of a space ark located on the moon, that he was also taken to Jupiter's moon Ganymede. These are operations controlled by Space Command. But he was also taken to the Atlantic Ocean, the Bermuda Triangle, where he was taken to this underground space ark in the Bermuda Triangle. And the critical thing to keep in mind here is that this location falls under the jurisdiction of Northern Command. Again, showing how close, how Northern Command's sphere of influence kind of overlaps with Space Command, because we're talking about some kind of submerged space ark. So Northern Command and Space Command are kind of collaborating on these. Another article I talked about was JP going to Florida, and he saw an underground civilization in Florida, and they handed over some gifts to humanity. And I cover that in an article, in an interview I did on Exopolitics Today. You can go to my website to get more information about that. So these are some of the missions he's done. Another one of the missions he did was he went out to a underwater city in the Atlantic Ocean, very close to the space ark. So this underwater city is a place that he traveled to. And again, the important takeaway here is that this mission would have involved collaboration between Northern Command, which has jurisdiction over what's submerged under the Atlantic Ocean, with Space Command, which has a lot more expertise with space arks and so forth. So now I'm going to get to information JP has shared about these civilizations revealing themselves in some kind of disclosure plan. And that 2023 is when they're going to start coming forward. So first of all, when JP visited this underground civilization in Florida at the end of 2022, he was taken to meet with this civilization of ant humanoid beings. He's been taken there 3 times now. And on his 3rd visit there, he met with this king, the king of the ant people, and they told him about their plan to reveal themselves more to surface humanity in 2023. So let me play that clip now.
So the king sits down, and I see his face. His eyes are brownish, and his pupil is huge, black, but his eyes are huge, but it's like brownish, like clearish brown. Really nice. It hypnotizes you when you look at him in the eyes. And I looked at him straight in the eyes, and I just got on one. I felt like getting on one knee, and I got on one knee, and I said, "Yes, Your Majesty." And he's like, "We're going to start going up, and people are going to start seeing more of us." And he told me to say that they're going to start teaching on Earth what they used to teach to other cultures, and that they're going to make the decision to some people if they want to go to where their cavern is. They decide if they want to come there. So he wants people to visit more of these parks, these massive forest parks, because they're going to open the opportunity for people to visit their cavern systems and let them to decide if they want to stay there and live there, because the arcs are getting ready to build up heat. And when they build heat, they're going to resurface. The arc also in the moon is getting hot as well. So the king was asking me to tell everybody that is hearing that soon that they're going to get the opportunity to visit these caverns. So a lot of people are going to be coming out with experiences of visiting these caverns with these people. So that was quite interesting, Doc.
Okay, so there's JP telling us about the plans of this ant civilization to start revealing themselves, to have more people being allowed to visit their facilities underground, and to then either choose to stay there or to come back and reveal what's going on. And this is part of their plan and their agenda. Now, what I'll show now is that these underground civilizations are working closely with the off-world beings, the extraterrestrials, Galactic Federation, to coordinate their efforts to reveal to humanity the truth about advanced underground or underwater civilizations and visiting extraterrestrials. So this takes me to JP visiting an underground civilization that's working with Nordics in February of this year. So this happened around February 8. As I said, this is an update from JP that's going to come out on Monday. You'll get to hear the full thing, but I'm going to play you a couple of clips so you get to actually have the scoop. You get to hear a little bit about what JP is going to be talking about. Now this is a drawing from JP. His artistic skills are still under development, but what that shows is the blue pit in the front there is kind of like water in an underground civilization. And behind it, those rows of white cigar-shaped objects, and then you have other rows. Those are hundreds of Nordic spacecraft, all lined up in formation, taking off, landing, where Nordic extraterrestrials are walking around. In other words, this is a spaceport, a very large spaceport used by the Nordics. And behind that, in the distance, those green-looking objects, this is an underground civilization. And what JP says is that this underground civilization is working closely with the Nordics. So now I'm going to play you an extract from our update that's going to come out on Monday.
So all of those hundreds of ships, those Nordic ships that you saw, I mean, they are all part of this kind of monitoring of surface humanity. I mean, there's no plan to have those kind of like reveal themselves or anything like that. Were you told anything about that?
They do show themselves to certain people. They say people that are worthy, that are pure of heart, but the military has a video of these ships, but they're still holding them back. There's still a group of people that really wants to show videos and all that, but they said it's because of protection of humanity. They need to keep this secret for now, and they know that they really want the public to see the technology that they have, to share the technology, but they're keeping the technology safe because there's a temporal war going on, and it's dangerous, the temporal war that's going on. There's people jumping on different timelines, doing different things. So because of the temporal war, it's dangerous. Everybody's knowing about the arcs right now. So once the arcs are fully activated, that's when the first wave is going to be all these UFOs coming out and making contact with major powers, with the civilian sector, them coming out. We're going to see them like cars. We're going to see these ships like birds, like a regular basis. You know, we're seeing them now on a regular basis, but when the arcs are fully activated, that's when you're going to see all these fleets of UFOs coming out, landing, flying up on different places. You're going to see them. People are going to be riding on them. And then that's also when the AMP people are going to come out and interact with us. But there's a lot of people that don't want that to happen. They don't want that part to happen. 2025, supposedly they're going to send people to the moon, and that's going to be revealed also what we have in the moon to the public. 2024 also is going to be a major breakthrough, but 2023, they're deciding 2023 for the UFOs to come more public and fly out more.
Right, so there you have JP talking about his latest mission, and that extraterrestrial civilization, sorry, that underground civilization that he visited was not the Ant people. It was another civilization of 7 foot tall humanoids. So there are multiple underground civilizations that JP is interacting with. So the main takeaways from that particular extract is that the US military is cooperating with inner Earth civilizations. So that's the Ant people and this particular civilization adjacent to this Nordic space port underground there in Florida. and they're cooperating on a disclosure plan. And this is, I thought, very relevant to what Elena Danaan revealed in terms of this disclosure plan that was given by the Galactic Federation to the commander of Northcom, General Van Herk, that JP seems to be performing missions that is directly relevant to that. Now, of course, he said that when the space arcs fully activate, the space fleets will emerge for the public to see. So 2023, we're going to have more sightings of Nordic space fleets. So now we're going to go to another slide, another extract, where he's going to talk more about the collaboration between US military or the Earth Alliance and the inner Earth beings and the Nordics or the Galactic Federation of Worlds. So let me play that clip for you now.
Okay, so they're kind of trying to raise consciousness by having more of their ships showing, and that's going to prepare for the arcs being revealed at some point, whether later 2023, 2024.
That's going to get people used to these ships first. Like the people are going to see them like birds, you know, like every day, like, oh, look, a UFO, you know, and people are going to have contacts. There's going to be videos. There's going to be, so they're going to have people used to it. Like they're going to get people used to these ships flying around, and they're going to be revealed that the military is with them. It's okay, that they're safe. You know, this balloon situation can tell you how nervous a nation can get when they see an flying object over another nation. It's not only happening in the United States, this is happening all over the place, you know? This is a preparation, you know? How would nations react when they see a UFO? Would they shoot it down? Would they want it to land, make contact to it, and have a peaceful, you know, peaceful reaction? So everything happens for a purpose, Doc, I believe. Everything is happening for a purpose. And right now is not the time for the UFOs, unidentified flying objects, to fly. It will be soon. It will be sometime this year or 2024. They will be flying around like birds, like regularly, like planes. It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, well, what you described sounds like the Nordics have reached agreements with the US military on a disclosure plan, that they're collaborating for disclosure.
Well, not only the US military, the Chinese, the Russians, Israel. There's going to be a lot of nations together, and we have to be all on the same page before this happens. That's what's happening. A lot of people don't want. A lot of nations are trying to prove each other wrong. You know, I don't know if you know what I'm trying to say. Like, I don't want to put names out there, but like, for example, you're a nation, I'm a nation. We both got contacts with the Nordics, and one nation tells another nation, tells the Nordics that, hey, you want to see if this nation is ready to receive what you want to show them? Watch. We're going to put something on top of this nation, and you're going to see what's going to happen. So I'm not going to say no more.
Okay, I think that's
I can't say no more.
So it's kind of like China had arranged for this balloon to go over because their agenda was to show that maybe the Chinese are more prepared than the Americans for disclosure, if that's an agenda.
I'm not saying it, you're saying it.
Okay.
Right, so there you have JP on this multinational aspect to this collaboration ongoing between different major nations. So what we have here is major collaboration happening between different nations and this Earth Alliance. And the Earth Alliance is ensuring that what each nation is doing is part of this coordinated disclosure plan. So there's a coordination happening here, not only involving the United States with Nordics or the Galactic Federation and underground civilizations to promote full disclosure. So this is again just more confirmation that some kind of disclosure plan is now underway. So we are in the midst of an acclimation process to prepare the general public for what in the future is going to be a reality where our skies are filled with all of these spacecraft, and many of these are going to be extraterrestrial craft, in addition to craft belonging to the major nations. So there's and also very interesting that JP hinted at, that there's a kind of perception war going on. You know, one nation wants to upstage another nation, that China and the US, that China wants to upstage the US, saying, well, look how the American people react to this UFO or this, balloon incident. Well, shows you just how fearful they are. But we, the Chinese people, we're very happy to welcome UFOs, rather than shooting them down. And so therefore, we should be the one that leads the planet. So there is this kind of element of rivalry. And that was one of the things when I talked about this Jupiter Accords earlier on, where we had these 14 nations meeting back in July 2021, and the US was chosen to head this executive committee. China and Russia in particular were making a strong case that they should be the ones to lead this unified Earth effort to coordinate with the galactics for taking control of our solar system. But the responsibility was given to the United States, to Space Command in particular. So what this tells us is that what we're witnessing right now, with the Biden administration trying to kind of like ratchet things up, tensions with Russia, ratchet things up in terms of tensions with China over Taiwan, that all of that is just kind of like a psyop. It's all public manipulation, that behind the scenes, all of these nations are collaborating with galactic civilizations. They're collaborating with underground ancient civilizations, and that they are collaborating with one another in terms of a disclosure plan. So there's a kind of like, we need to be very careful of not buying too much into the mainstream media propagation. So is there any evidence for any of this? I mean, what proof is there that this is real, that the extraterrestrials, the negative extraterrestrials that were backing the deep state left the Earth because these CEDAR groups arrived in our solar system, and that they began collaborating with positive extraterrestrials and with the Earth Alliance, and that led to the negative groups leaving, leading to the abandonment of the deep state elites because their former allies had left? Is there any evidence supporting that? So that's the scenario that I've been presenting so far. So there is an independent source, in fact, 3 independent sources that are mainstream that are talking about this. This is where I want to introduce John Peterson from the Arlington Institute. Now, John Peterson created the Arlington Institute in 1989 as a US Navy funded think tank. So it's very mainstream. It was funded significantly by the US Navy to envisage future global scenarios involving the distribution and use of advanced technologies and extraterrestrial contact. So he's a futurist. So his job with US Navy funding was to find out, well, how would the American public react to a future where things like anti-gravity technology was widely available, free energy technologies were widely used, that extraterrestrials could be seen walking amongst us. How would the public react to that? So his job was to kind of like commission studies, to do research papers on that. So he's very mainstream, even though he's doing these future studies on these really radical concepts and ideas. So what he said very recently in an interview with Greg Braden, I thought was very, very significant, because in this interview, he cited 3 sources confirming the exact scenario that Elena Danaan first described in the middle of 2021, that was later backed up by JP and others, but Elena was the first to put it out. John Peterson confirmed that. And what's interesting about him is that he is not from the UFO community. He is by no means associated with UFO conspiracy theories. He's very much plugged into major Washington, D.C. think tanks doing these future studies that directly implicate the development and formula and the implementation of policy. So he's a major mainstream figure, and so he's saying his sources are telling him exactly what Elena described. So I'm going to play a clip, an extract from the interview he did with Greg Braden, where he talks about this.
Sources that I have are suggesting that, in fact, that there's been a major, this is last calendar year, 2022, that the good forces, if you will, have made extraordinary kind of advances and have essentially driven the negative forces off the planet and out of the solar system at least, or something like that. And therefore, what is happening is that the human component, the human leadership elements who used to have the cover and resources and the other kind of things from the soft planet group, and it's a group of it's a number of groups in a larger group. They've always had the direction and the help and the resources and so on, and now that's gone. I've got this from 3 different sources, independent sources. That's gone, and that those folks who we all kind of presume to be up at the top and kind of driving things are scrambling very hard to try to hang on, because they've lost their kind of sponsor, if you will. And so, which is why I would suggest that people like Martin Armstrong and Cliff High and others all say that 2023 is going to be wild and crazy, because what you've got is the residual leadership who have lost their support and their energetics and other kind of things apparently, who are going to be carrying on, hanging on as best they can, because they can see the cliff coming very closely, and if they can't get this turned in time, they're going over the cliff. And so it's existential. So there's this is 2020. This year is amazing in terms of its importance and significance.
Right, so there you have it from an independent source that is outside of the UFO community, saying that 2023 is the year when we are going to have major developments concerning the disclosure of what's been happening behind the scenes concerning UFOs, spacecraft, secret space programs, extraterrestrials. And he corroborates the information that the deep state has been abandoned by their former overlords, that the extraterrestrials, the negative extraterrestrials, left town because the positives arrived. So this is, again, from a major mainstream source, a Navy-funded think tank, saying that the information from Elena Danaan is absolutely correct. So he corroborates what Elena wrote about in her book, The Cedars. If you haven't got that yet, then definitely recommend it. And my book, I wrote about that as well, these developments. in terms of the arrival of the CETAs, the positive extraterrestrials, and why the negative extraterrestrials were leaving. So this is a very major development, that the control hierarchy that has been in place on our planet for centuries, if not millennia, involving these negative extraterrestrial groups working with and controlling elites, global elites, that have a kind of like a chain of command, a hierarchy themselves, that now, because the negative extraterrestrials have had to leave, have been forced to leave our solar system because it's been handed over to Space Command, that the deep state are now floundering. They're directionless. They are kind of like they're coming up with tactics, even though strategically they've lost the war. So they're responding tactically in a narrative war which is strategic. So they're bound to fail. So I thought it was really very appropriate to include a segment from a colleague, Alex Collier, who's, many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with Commander Collier. He has been a long-term Andromedan contactee, claims to have been a galley cook on one of the Andromeda starships, but I think he did a lot more than that. But Alex had something to say about what has happened to the deep state and its abandonment by the negative extraterrestrials, and what that means for us. We here, everyone participating in this webinar, how are we part of this unfolding drama on planet Earth? And I thought Alex's clip, an extract from his video, or from his webinar that he did yesterday, sorry, 2 days ago, on Thursday. So if you haven't subscribed to Alex Collier's Q&A, I think it's a great investment to kind of keep up to date on what's going on. So this is what he had to say about this. So I'm going to play the clip now.
They put all of these things in motion back in 2016, 2017 to take everything down, to create the new world order. They put all of this in motion. And everything that we see now, the illegal immigration and the dumping of militarized young men in countries all over Europe, this was all done intentionally to bring society down, to destroy it. And that's because the people who were on point with all of this were not humans. But they're minions. They're those who were human that were handling humanity, the bribing the politicians, blackmailing politicians, and others. They're now left, whoever's left, to do the work, to try to carry this out. And they're failing. It's all coming apart. In some areas, it's quicker than others. So it's important to note that this is what you're watching. And you could get all emotional and caught up in the actual events. And yes, some of them are terrible. But at the same time, you have to understand why these things are happening. It's not just enough to know that they're terrible, but now you have some background as to why they're happening. And that's because we have two sides, two polarities. And one particular polarity, that which is of a higher vibration, is clearly hammering the lower vibration, okay? And at some point, that hammering the lower vibration will, but for all intents and purposes, shatter. It'll just shatter. It won't completely go away, but it will shatter. It will no longer have any power structure, which is what's been controlling the planet for many, many years, hundreds of years.
So there's Alex's take on what we are witnessing right now, the collapse of the deep state agenda, as those that are in control of a lot of the major media, educational institutions, the Congress, don't have the strategy, don't have the resources to kind of deal with the departure of their extraterrestrial overlords, and the white hats, the Earth Alliance, have what it takes now to move forward, to take our planet on this positive timeline of disclosure. So I wanted to play a short clip from the trailer that Angelica and I worked on that was censored by YouTube. So I wanted to play a short clip from that I think summarizes nicely exactly what has happened. So now let's play that short clip.
2021, the arrival of 24 extraterrestrial founder races, or seeders, fundamentally altered the balance of power on Earth and in our solar system after they appeared in massive fleets that parked around Jupiter. The seeders possessed advanced surveillance and disruption technologies that far exceeded that of the lower density alien beings that have long exercised control over the Earth. Alarmed over the seeders' arrival,
Red alert.
the former extraterrestrial overlords of Earth began systematically departing our solar system.
Benevolent galactic organizations were consequently empowered to take action against any regressive extraterrestrials that remained on the Earth, Moon, Mars, or elsewhere in our solar system. The subsequent departure of the regressive aliens has left their former minions, the deep state, and the secret societies behind it, alone and abandoned.
God help us.
So what's coming in 2023? The deep state's playing its final cards. It wants to create global chaos, stealing elections, DNA altering vaccines, contriving the Ukraine war, food shortages, rising energy costs. These are the things that it tried to do 2020, 2021, 2022. It went through all of those cards, it played all of those cards, and now we are witnessing it play its final card, which is this UFO psyop. So what's coming? So the galactic civilizations are helping the Earth Alliance neutralize the deep state actions, allowing the humanity to wake up in greater and greater numbers. So whatever the deep state does, its plans get disrupted by this collaboration between the Earth Alliance and the positive extraterrestrials that can see further into the future and know what the deep state is doing. So the result of all of this is that more and more people are getting woken up, as we are witnessing now with this UFO psyop playing out, that just more and more people are waking up now. Now they're finally paying attention to UFOs, and once you've got people talking about UFOs, the cat's out of the bag. Now they're going to start going down that rabbit hole of like, well, what's going on with this? What's the truth here? Because now people are going to want to find out what's really going on with UFOs. So this is leading to the mass awakening. Now, one of the things that's going to be really very important is the over 6,000 inventions that have been suppressed from being publicly released. That this is going to be something that's going to be overturned in 2023, 2024, that more and more of these inventions are going to be eventually released. And many lead with, many of these inventions deal with alternative health and energy technologies. And so this tells you, this is a chart that the US Patent and Trademark Office issues every year, and it gives a summary of the secrecy orders that are in place suppressing the release of patents that, for one reason or another, threaten national security. And so that tells you, going through the different years, starting off fiscal year 2018, there were 5,792. to fiscal year 2022, that there are just over 6,000 patents that are suppressed from being released, where the inventor cannot talk about his patent, he cannot commercialize his patent, he cannot collaborate with our corporations to build whatever technology he or she has developed, because to do so would be in violation of his secrecy order. He could be imprisoned, his assets confiscated. This is a very effective way of muzzling these technologies from coming forward, and it has been going on for a long, long time. But this is something that is about to be overturned. And so that'll be very, very exciting. Now, one of the things that I found very helpful in understanding exactly what has been suppressed is a document that one of my colleagues, Dan Willis, who's watching this, hi Dan, he showed me this document, which is the kinds of technologies that fall under the category of sensitive application warning system. So this document is used to suppress anti-gravity, free energy, and other breakthrough technologies, because these technologies in some way threaten national security if they're released into the public. So perpetual motion machines, anti-gravity devices, room temperature semiconductors that could hold tremendous amounts of energy. So, rather than having these small batteries that discharge, in a couple of hours, you could actually have a battery that can hold enough charge to power your house for a week with these room temperature superconductors, or a month. They don't want this released. Free energy, tachyons, faster than light particles, gain-assisted superluminal light propagation, faster than light travel. Other matters that violate the general laws of physics. So anything that violates the general laws of physics, they do not want those inventions released on national security grounds, because they fall under this category of sensitive application warning system. So they get tagged with that, and then you have a secrecy order attached to that patent application. And so it becomes part of this 6,000 applications that are being suppressed, and inventors can't do anything about them. They have to sit on them, or they end up in jail. I mean, what a terrible system. That's what's been going on for decades. It's about to end. So what's coming? Free energy systems will be released as the new power source replacing fossil fuels. We don't need oil and gas and anything that consumes natural resources. Free energy is abundant, and it can be taken out of the vacuum. Flying cars, ships, homes will become the new standard as anti-gravity technology is released. Holographic healing technology, again, this is one of those categories of inventions that have been suppressed because the pharmaceutical industry is a major revenue earner for the deep state. They make billions or trillions even from the pharmaceutical industry. Holographic healing would put an end to all of that. That's why the deep state is fighting tooth and nail to suppress disclosure. But it's coming because the Earth Alliance is working with the Galactic Federation to release all this. Isn't that, effing fantastic? It's great. That's what's happening. We're entering a galactic golden age. Full disclosure rapidly coming as secret space programs, inner Earth civilizations, awakened giants, and galactic civilizations are going to be revealed. Now, I haven't talked about giants much. I talked about that in my previous webinar, which is why I didn't want to cover it in this webinar. But in my previous webinar, I talked about that the giants, including these Anunnaki scientists that were part of a faction of Anunnaki that were very progressive and wanting to help humanity in developing these advanced technologies and merge that with alchemy so that we could become a galactic civilization, that they are going to awaken and share their insights and their knowledge of how advanced technology with alchemy can be shared to save humanity from fuel shortages, hunger, poor health, etc. So I talked about that in my last webinar. So you can get that on Vimeo. So what's coming? We're entering a galactic golden age. Humanity to become expert problem solvers, Jedi Knights in dealing with the negative entities, and will help other civilizations around the galaxy deal with similar problems. I mean, the absolute crap fest that we've had to deal with for the last century, since Nikola Tesla came forward with all of these advanced technologies that could have lifted us into the 21st century, and instead it was suppressed. The First World War was contrived to kind of keep us in the 19th century of fossil fuel consumption. And we haven't shifted from there. In the early 20th century, we could have shifted from fossil fuels into this free energy paradigm, but it was suppressed. So we've lost 100 years of history because the inventions that Nikola Tesla came up with in the early 1900s, radiant energy and electromagnetic healing and frequency therapies, all of these things, electromagnetic shields, all of these advanced technologies were suppressed. And inventors that continued to work on Tesla technologies, they were suppressed in turn. And their technology applications or their patent applications have been included in these 6,000 patents that have been suppressed all this time. But all that's about to change. And we have the memory of that. That'll be now part of our consciousness, our genetics. And so when all of this transpires and we emerge as a galactic civilization, we are going to remember all of this. And we are going to be going out into the galaxy, carrying the memory of how the deep state operates. So we can go to many other worlds where these deep state factions are operating with the support of negative extraterrestrials to suppress the evolution of those worlds. So we'll become like galactic Jedi Knights, if you like, in knowing this. So in finishing up, I wanted to include a last extract from the trailer I did with Angelica, where we present this. So let's play that trailer.
Deep State's imminent collapse will facilitate major disclosures in 2023 about secret space programs, flourishing undersea and underground cities, artifacts from ancient civilizations, and visiting extraterrestrial life, all of which have long been kept secret by the global control system. The exposing of the Deep State's planetary management system opens the door for ordinary individuals to finally have access to the advanced technologies that, until now, have been restricted to the deep state and secret societies by being locked away in highly classified facilities.
An Earth alliance of positive military forces from all major nations are quietly cooperating with positive extraterrestrial organizations and the elders from non-surface civilizations to disclose the truth. Plans have been developed behind the scenes to release advanced healing technologies as the first step in a series of revelations. These revelations will bring an end to the global technological segregation system, which was secretly put in place to keep ordinary civilians away from advanced life-changing technologies. Great, so there's a lot to be optimistic about. Incredible things are going to be happening. As 2023 plays out, we're going to see the deep state control system collapse, and more of this positive agenda is going to happen. We're going to have this disclosure plan moving forward into higher and higher gear. So all of us participating into this, we are all going to be playing important roles, because every one of us is going to be teaching others that have been totally oblivious of all of this, all of their lives. So we are the ones that are going to wake them up. So everyone watching this, you're going to wake up your friends, your family, your work colleagues, and your community to all of this, because you've been absorbing this information for years and decades. And now all of a sudden, rather than being dismissed and ridiculed, your knowledge is going to be valued and people are going to seek you out. So very exciting times for all of us. If you wanted to get more information about the past webinars, I have a video on demand page on Vimeo. I will be increasingly moving things over to Brighteon in the months ahead, just in case the censorship continues and that impacts Vimeo. But for the moment, all of my webinars are on Vimeo. We'll see if they allow this webinar to go up there as well. But certainly I'll create a page on Brighteon for you to watch that. I want to thank my team, Angelica in particular, for looking after the video switching and doing the Q&A, and of course the fabulous trailer that she put together. That's really wonderful. So I know that it was a surprise to both of us that it got censored, but we're very happy that when it went on to Rumble, it got a lot of people to take a look at it. So we're very happy with that. So if you haven't already done so, subscribe to Rumble and support channels on Rumble that are trying to present the what's really happening in a censorship-free environment. Jazz Marlon also has been helping behind the scenes with your Q&A, technical questions, and with the development of this webinar. So thanks, Jazz. So finally, I want to thank you, because I think you watching this, you are truly what gives me a lot of hope for the future, because your numbers are growing, you're becoming more confident, you're becoming more informed, and the more information you have, the more you can share this with people. And now all of a sudden, people are paying more attention to what you say. And so we're all working together as a team to awaken this planet to the truth. And so I'm very grateful for your support, for you registering for these webinars, buying my books, and just being supportive of my work over the years. It's been a difficult journey. You know, it's life on the bleeding edge for many of us. I certainly have experienced that. Angelica has experienced that. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. But good times are coming, and that's something to look forward to. So I want to thank you and look forward to seeing you in the future. Aloha.